All right, so we're going to do a brief intro to data sufficiency because this is a unique type of question that was invented by the GMAT for the GMAT. So I want to make sure that we just understand the rules of the game here, what these answer choices mean, and break down an example question so we can kind of see it out in action. So each data sufficiency question involves a prompt and two statements. These two statements are hints that the author is giving us to help us solve the question up here. So this is the main question that we're answering, and these are the hints associated with that question. Now, if we read this question, it says, if x is an integer, what is the value of x cubed? So I'm really asking x cubed equals question mark. And a lot of times on data sufficiency, I like to write this down on my paper so I don't lose sight of what I'm actually trying to answer. You're not trying to answer the solution to x in this formula, for example, and you're not trying to answer the solution to x in this option. What you're trying to do is you're trying to answer x cubed, and this can sometimes be a little bit different than answering for x. Looking at the statements, so we have statement 1, it says x to the 5th power is 1024, and then statement 2 says x to the 4th is 256. Now we'll get into how these are slightly different, but you can see what they're doing. They're both helping to evaluate what x is equal to. And before we dive into it, I want to look at our answer choices here. So answer choice A says statement 1 alone is sufficient, but statement 2 is not sufficient. So sufficient here really means enough information. So when we say sufficient, statement 1 is sufficient, that would mean that statement 1 on its own gave us enough information to answer the question, x cubed is equal to what? But statement 2 alone was not good enough to answer that question. Now, answer choice B is the exact opposite. B says statement 2 alone is sufficient, and statement 1 alone is not sufficient. Answer choice C says both statements together are sufficient. So that means combining both pieces of information, using them together as almost like a double hint is enough information to solve the question, but neither of them alone is sufficient. So if either of these alone was sufficient, if either of these gave you enough info on their own, we would be answering either A or B or D, which we're going to cover now. D says each of them on their own were sufficient. So if statement 1 gives you enough info and statement 2 gives you enough info, then answer choice D is the answer that you would want. In a hierarchy, D is the best answer, then A and B, then C, and then E. And E says even when we take both pieces of information together, it's still not enough information to answer the question. So again, our best possible answer would be getting a D. This is the hardest answer to get because it requires that both pieces of information on their own were sufficient. Then it's A and B, and these are the second hardest to get because it requires one of the pieces of information to be a strong enough hint on its own to answer the question. Answer choice C is what we would get if neither A nor B were good options, but when we combine the statements, we were able to answer the question. And finally, if we can't answer the question after all that, it's answer choice E. So this is the hierarchy of answer choices. Some people like to write this out and think about it. For me, I kind of internalize this and I know what I'm going for and I don't need to write this out every time. I do think it is a bit of a waste of time to write it out. So let's look at this question and see if we can answer it. The question is, if x is an integer, so it's important that we know that it's an integer apparently, and it might be a red herring, you never know. Sometimes they give you extra info that's not really relevant. What is the value of x cubed? Okay, so x cubed, right off the bat, I like to identify exponents as either being even or odd. Because if you have an even exponent, there are two possible scenarios for what x could equal. Could equal positive or negative 2. But if you have an odd exponent, there's only one option, and that is that x equals 2 in this scenario. Because when you take something to an even exponent, whether it's a 2, a 4, or whatever, it always comes out positive. And when you take something to an odd exponent, it's going to keep whatever sign it originally had. So having an even exponent involves some information loss. And if you look at statement 2 here, we have an even exponent of 4. And that's going to lead to some information loss about what number we started with. So if x to the 4 equals 256, then x equals the positive or negative fourth root of 256. And I don't have to actually solve this to know if this is enough information or not. I already know it's not enough information because I'm looking for x cubed, and x cubed is going to have the exact same sign as x. So I need to know if it's positive or negative from the start in order to answer this question. And this doesn't tell me that because I have two options here. But statement 1 is sufficient. So I'm going to write not sufficient, NS, for statement 2. Statement 1 is sufficient because I have an odd exponent. So whatever sign x started with is what sign I get on the right. And I get a positive sign, so that means that x is positive. Now I also know that x is equal to the fifth root of 1024. And the cool thing about exponents is there's only one fifth root for any exponent. So there's only one fifth root for any number. So there's only one number that taken to the fifth power gives you 32. That's the number 2. 2 to the fifth power is 32. It doesn't matter what number I put over here. There's always only going to be one solution if it's a single variable to an odd exponent. So statement 1 is definitely sufficient, and that leads us to answer choice A. Statement 1 alone is sufficient, but statement 2 alone is not sufficient.